My guest on the show today is Jim Cotton. Now, Jim was working in a very stable career job in London, and he didn't enjoy it. And he didn't enjoy London life and had a few issues in general. So he ditched the career and London life and moved to the countryside with no job, only idea of becoming a writer in cycling. And he'd already started a blog and had a master's degree in English Lit, so he wasn't just starting this from nowhere. So he spent a year living off very little and getting small bits of writing work. And he stuck with it. And over the next 3 or 4 years, developed his portfolio and profile, including work with leading UK and US cycling magazine websites. Now, Jim is an endurance rider predominantly, loving riding in the mountains. He works as a brand ambassador for Hot Route and is a Marmot Gran Fondo addict. Now, I'm probably butchering how you actually properly say that, so excuse me on that. But I know what they are. I just can't say them properly. And Jim struggles.
No, you did well. You did pretty well.
Oh, thank you. You're being too kind. Jim struggles a bit with disordered eating. And I think this is really, really interesting and it's going to benefit a lot of people. So I really appreciate Jim talking about this. And it can get to the point where it impacts his performance. And he's been dealing with this for 7 or 8 years. So we're going to talk about this later in the show. He's done some weightlifting. This is actually something that Jim and I have connected on a lot. And I really appreciate this because some of my endurance buddies, I can't get into the gym and lifting weights, or they might just do some core work. But Jim gets in there, he throws around some heavy weights and he really works hard. So I really like this about Jim. And you can check out Jim's work on mountainmutton.com. And you can see links to all of his magazine articles and his blog. He's actually an outstanding writer. I was telling him earlier, I thought I was an okay writer until I started reading his stuff, and it just made me mad how good of a writer he is. So the name of your site's mountainmutton.com. So my first question to you, Jim, is where did this name Mountain Mutton come from?
Uh, it was it's a sort of a bit of a joke that I think a lot of people don't really get, and I have a bad habit of making jokes which are a little bit too sort of clever for their own worth. So basically, there's the phrase in cycling "mountain goat," which basically means you're a good climber and you go well up a mountain. And I love cycling in the mountains, and it's kind of the side of riding that I'm best at. So it was a reference to mountain goat, but I also don't want people to think I'm taking myself too seriously or that I'm that good. So I thought mutton is, it's an old stringy type of lamb or sheep, and it's sort of just indicating perhaps like I'm an old past it useless mountain goat, like maybe I was once good or I'm a bad version of a mountain goat. So that's what it is basically.
Well, so I will correct everybody that might think that about you straight away. So I have some friends that I cycle with here in Hong Kong who I would consider world-class cyclists. And I know some of the international rides that you've done in the same race with them, you've put them under by quite a few minutes. So you're a damn good cyclist. And and if you want to call yourself Mountain Mutton, that's just fine. It means you're a heck of a good cyclist, a good climber at that. So we know now you're a good cyclist. My audience knows you're an amazing cyclist. But have you always loved cycling? When did you really get into cycling?
Quite late actually. So quite a lot of people who take cycling so seriously as so I'm in my early 30s, and a lot of people who are still really loving the bike at my age and taking it so seriously get into it through their parents, like maybe when they're in their teenagers. But for me, I've always loved cycling and I've always loved being outdoors. So when I was a kid, I would have a mountain bike and I'd go off adventuring in the woods and, getting lost in the woods and coming back about 3 hours later than I told my mum I would. And then when I went to university, and all through my teenage years, I would mess around on my bike a bit and just have fun. Went to university and inevitably a lot of sport took the back seat because of parties and studying, but I still rode my bike just to get around, like to commute and to get to classes. And when I moved to London, I kept riding for commuting. And then the longer I spent living in London, the more and more I wanted to sort of get out of London because it's such a big claustrophobic place. So I started using just my commute bike and just go riding out of the city on like big long adventures, just kind of like riding a road bike around. And the more, and this was probably when I was in my about 23, 24, 25. And the more and more I did it, and the better I got. Just like on a fairly average, like aluminium commuter road bike, the more I got into it, and the more I started doing it, and the more I started reading about it, about how to train and like what bikes are good. And the more I did it, the more I got into it, and then I started taking it much more seriously and sort of competitively from the age of around 25, 26. All my life, though, I've been quite into sport. So all through school and university, I played rugby union and I did a lot of running. So I'm naturally actually a better runner than I am cyclist. I'm quite tall and thin, and I've got a runner's build, but I'm quite prone to injury when I run. So I did it for a few years and then I stopped. And cycling, you don't get that impact injury stuff with cycling. So yeah, so that's where I am now, really.
That's interesting. I have two good friends of mine that kind of have that same story of like really, really strong runner. And they're both really good cyclists. And to find out that they're even stronger on the run is pretty, it's deflating for somebody like me that's trying to keep up. I want to know if you agree with them. So they told me this in separate instances. My friend, Scott back in the US, who ran in university, said that when he's climbing a hill, that's on the bike, that's the closest thing he feels to running. And then my friend Sheil here, who's also a world-class runner from the UK, says the same thing. And they're both like crazy fast climbers. And they say it's like they have something to push against, and it sort of feels like running when they're climbing up a hill. Is it like that for you?
Yeah, that's really, really interesting that they say that, actually, because when you stand in the pedals, when you climb up a steep hill, so when you're out of the saddle, it's more kind of, it opens up your body, it opens up your hips and your hip flexors, and it's more of a similar action to running. And that is actually something that I first heard said so there's a pro cyclist who rides for EF Pro Cycling, and he's called Mike Woods, and he's like one of the best in the world at climbing. So he's, he could be a contender at a Grand Tour like the Tour de France. He's like top 10 rider. But his background, he was a world-class runner until the age of about 26. And I can't remember the story as to why, but he stopped running and he is now like this world-class climber on a bike. And he said exactly that, in that climbing up a steep mountain when you're out of the saddle is a really similar sort of action to running. So that goes back to what your friend said. And yeah, I agree. So I think, yeah, runners make good climbers, I guess.
It must be something to it. I have a similar feeling where they're both like make my heart rate go through the roof, and I'm in extreme pain, but I don't think it's quite a vibe that you guys are talking about.
No, it is. We all feel the same amount of pain. It's just some of us are going a little bit faster as we do it.
Well, I believe it was the Marmot race. You wrote a really cool article on decoding data that I want to talk about a little bit later more, but I looked at your Strava from that you very nicely shared. And so this was like, I think it was a 7+ hour ride over a few mountains. and your heart rate was in zone 2. It was like 140 average or something like that over the course of the whole ride. Like mine would be at 180 in the first 3 minutes. Like the fact that you're able to, I know there's a lot of work and a lot of training that goes into that, but to climb a mountain like that and to keep your heart rate down that low and still be working pretty hard is a pretty good sign of a strong climber.
Yeah, well, I think that sort of zone 2 might have been an average, because there was definitely times when I was like deep in the red. But yeah, to do endurance sports like that, where most of the things I compete in most are 5, 6, 7 hours, you do need to be able to control your heart rate as much as possible, and more importantly, not let it drift too much. So there's a thing of cardiac drift where your heart rate keeps getting higher and higher and higher, even at the same intensity. And a lot of my training is like quite low intensity, but just training that drift to not to drift too much, to keep me efficient. So yeah, my general heart rate is low. Like my resting wake up heart rate is about 38.
Oh my gosh. See, this is what, let's talk about this for a second. So this is what people need to understand about endurance training or cardiovascular training. Let's not even say endurance. So I like the way, I think Ben Greenfield said it this way once. I think it's a good analogy. So if we think of our heart as like a battery, okay, your battery or your heart has so many beats in it. Okay, so let's say it's 1 trillion beats, whatever. When you go out and you train, you're going to get your heart rate going higher than it normally would when you're just at rest. Everybody knows that. Why do we do that? Because for the times that you're not training, how much less work is it actually doing? So if you've got that 1 trillion heartbeats in your battery over the span of your life, if you average out the times that you went up to your 140 average or 150 or 160 versus the time where you're asleep at night for 8 hours, I hope, where it's at 38, that's going to add up a lot slower than somebody that's at 60 or 65 where they're at rest. That's why you do cardiovascular training. That's why you keep your heart in check, because you're going to be doing less work over time if you get your heart functioning more efficiently. That's 38's disgusting. I don't know how you live with yourself. That's pretty damn low.
It's all relative though. Like my maximum heart rate is also really low. And I know some people who are much better endurance athletes than me whose resting might be 50. I think there is a lot of relative,
True.
like relative.
When you go up in the red, what does it look like for you? If you're smashing it up a hill, everything you got, where are you maxing at?
My max is probably about 170.
Okay, yeah. Yeah,
so
I wonder.
I've got a relatively small band between my resting and my max, whereas if your resting is say 60, I bet your max is nearly two. I know some people whose max is like 210, and if I hit 210, I'd probably be dead, like in hospital.
Right. Before we move on, I want to make sure we talk about this transition that you did. So you're a freelance writer, as we talked about in your bio. And so this transition, it sounds kind of scary to me. Like you had this really cool, stable job in London, but you were kind of done with it. You were done with the gig. You were done with London life. What was that transition life where you were sort of living off of ramen noodles for the first year or two?
Yeah, it was tough. So when I was in London for 10 years, and I was doing, so really briefly, I've got a master's in English literature, but I also have a accountancy qualification. I'm actually a chartered accountant as well. And I fell into this accountancy job and I didn't like it, and I left, as you said, and I left London. And for that first year, when I was trying to build my sort of portfolio of writing work, it was really tough. Like I luckily I had some connections at a local bike shop, and I was working there on like very minimal pay, just being like a sales guy in like it's a cafe as well, like serving up coffees and stuff. And it was really nervy, because I knew that I'd left a job where I probably, as long as I pulled my weight, could have been there until I was 50 or 60. and I was getting paid a reasonable amount. But also in the back of my mind, I did have these qualifications. Like I did have an accountancy qualification, which if I really had to, I could use to get a job in a commercial sphere, like to be an accountant or a business guy. But basically, I was stressed like all the time. I was worried all the time, and I would spend huge amounts of my time just researching brands that might want a freelance copywriter. So I was looking for gigs in mostly in sport and cycling sort of journalism. Uh, but I just had to. I mean, the first 6 months, I was like, it's okay, it'll come, it'll come. The second 6 months, the work was still like really slow to come. And that's when I was like, holy S, like, should I have done this? But I just kind of kept faith with it, and I just stuck it out for a little bit longer, and then I just got a few gigs kind of after about a year of not really having much that started to get the ball rolling and kind of gave me confidence to keep going with it. And I was still not earning much, but I sort of started having these few gigs behind me, gave me confidence in myself that I could probably carve something out of this sort of life. And I was just really, I was much more enjoying my life. Like being freelance, I could, if I wanted to, like I did yesterday, go and do 5 hours on my bike on a Monday morning. Whereas everybody else would be like, oh, Monday morning, I've got to go to the office and, sit here for 8 or 9 hours. So yeah, it was just patience and very nervy time. But yeah, you've got to believe in yourself. And I don't have family, didn't have a mortgage, and I was like, if I'm going to try and do this, I'm going to do it now.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I've left London and I've left the job, so I've got to give it a decent bit of time to try it, because if I go back to London or if I go back to a commercial job now, then I can't really try and do this again. This is like my one chance to try it.
Yeah, that was good foresight by you to realize that the time was now to go for it. And it was nice to sort of understand you had the qualifications to have a plan B if you needed to. But I wonder if, I'm curious if it made you a better writer. As I said earlier, I think you're a really good writer. Do you think that time where you're really working hard to make a name for yourself and get in print, do you think that made you a better writer, or did that make a difference at all?
I'm not sure. I've never really thought about that before. I guess it gave me quite a lot of time to write my own personal blog, which you referred to in my bio, Mountain Mutton thing, which perhaps kind of helped build my personality as a writer a little bit. And perhaps, I'm not sure. It sort of made me very honest with myself and with the things I was writing, because as you'll know, Paul, from the things you've read in my blog, I'm quite open and honest about things. And I don't really hold back with what I say. Sorry, I've sort of lost my own tangent here a bit. I guess the work that I was doing, putting a lot of concentration into, and whether that be my personal blog or the writing I was being paid for. So it kind of did help hone my skills, yes.
Yeah, sorry, it was kind of a random question, but I was just wondering if you probably were just a gifted writer to begin with, and that's fine. I was just wondering if, when you're, scrapping a little bit, if it honed your skills at all.
I think it did to some extent, but I did have the formal qualification, like as a master's degree in English literature, which helped.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Well, I want to talk about cyclists and strength training. Okay. So I've had a lot of fun watching you. We got to know each other on Jules' site, Unfound, which is really cool. If you guys haven't checked it out, we'll put a link to it in the show notes. We'll actually put links to everything we talk about in the show notes and blog, like always. So I've started following you on Instagram, And so I've been really watching you this winter in the off season, hitting those barbells hard. But for most cyclists, that's why I've really enjoyed getting to know you and watching you. There's an aversion to lifting weights, especially in season. Like, oh, off season, okay, maybe you'll see some folks trickle into the gym that are usually just hardcore cyclists. And I think it's out of concern of getting too heavy. I know it is, or getting too sore before their next workout on the bike and worried about hindering your performance. So what's your take on this, from your personal experience? And you obviously, out in the field, see a lot of other cyclists and what their workouts are. What do you see in the endurance community? Is it pretty consistent with that, where there's this aversion to lifting weights, especially by cyclists, because they're concerned about mass and about performance loss?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, really. There's two reasons a lot of people, well, three reasons, I guess, actually, a lot of people don't do it. I'm lucky. The first one, which you didn't actually mention, is that I'm lucky in that I have a more or less totally flexible schedule, and I have like facilities available to me. My friend runs a gym, so I can go and use that. But I
Nice.
think one thing is, if an athlete only has 8 hours a week or 10 hours a week to train, and they're a cyclist, they think, oh, I don't want to put 2 hours of that to the gym because that's less time on the bike. So I think one is actually the time availability. But I think the main two really are what you said. The first one being, in cycling, as you alluded to, unless you're like a track rider, rides on the velodrome, weight is a real big impact, has a real big impact into how fast you go. And inevitably, if you're lifting weights and you're doing them well, then you're going to gain some muscle mass.
Mm-hmm.
So that does put people off. The third thing, which you alluded to earlier, is that soreness that you get, and I that sort of DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness thing. It can really impact a training session on the bike. I think it's as much a mental thing as a physical thing, because particularly when I first, so I've kind of lifted on off for the last 3 or 4 years, and when you first start doing it, like, so you have in the peak of the season, I don't do it much, but then in off season, I really ramp it up again. And when I first start ramping it up in that first month, if I haven't been lifting much, because the previous months was the height of my season, then the DOMs is just awful. Like, I'll throw my leg over the saddle to go for a ride, and my glutes and my hamstrings would be like nearly cramping and stuff. And that doesn't do much good for your mental attitude to the ride.
Right.
And I think that both of those issues, like the weight and the soreness, if you're doing it well and you're doing the program right and you perhaps got guidance, then after a month, well, the soreness at least should start to ease. And part of why I actually reached out to you, Paul, in the first instance was, like, managing my nutrition to potentially try and help, and like my kind of mobility and things, like your kind of areas of expertise, to try and mitigate that soreness.
Right.
Because it does really impact how you ride when your legs hurt a lot already.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as a strength and conditioning coach, I really love seeing efforts made by endurance athletes who recognize the benefit, not only in power, but explosivity and injury prevention when you add strength training. And I like to hope that it would be something that's part of the program year round, not just in the off season. So I'm seeing that more and more. And what I'm trying to express carefully, because I'm not trying to rub anybody the wrong way, but I'm trying to help people understand that if they can just do 3 days a week of full body strength training, I'm not talking about this crazy like 500-pound deadlifts and 100-pound dumbbells on bench. Like, you can do a reasonable full body strength workout, even just with your body weight if you're traveling. I mean, you don't need anything fancy, but you can do a good full body strength workout 3 times a week. Say it's Monday, Wednesday, Friday, with a day in between to rest, and you can be out on the bike or whatever when you're doing that. You won't get sore. If you can do that for a few weeks in a row, 3 days a week, full body, you will not get sore. You will not get that delayed onset muscle soreness. Now, I'm not a good endurance athlete like you and a lot of my buddies are, but I can sort of keep their taillights in my sight, and I'm not sore. The reason I'm not keeping up with them is for a number of things, but it's not because I'm sore. That soreness will go away if you're consistent with it 3 times a week. But I understand the limited hours per week, maybe a little bit less love for the strength than there is for the bike and a lot of the things that we're battling. But I just want to put that out there in the universe that if you can be consistent with it, that, excuse me, that soreness, that does go away because your body adapts.
That's interesting, because if you do say have, just for example, 10 hours a week to train, it's just about understanding and having somebody perhaps like you who is a strength coach but understands riding. Because a lot of the time you have a cycling coach who sort of knows a little bit about strength, but it seems like you don't get many PTs or strength trainers who know much about cycling. It's about having somebody who can guide you as to what is the right mix of bike time and weightlifting or full body workout time. Because when you're a cyclist, you think, and especially for endurance sports, a lot of the success in endurance sport is about volume.
Yes.
There's a lot of programs saying, oh, with this high intensity program, you can be just as good off of 5 hours of high intensity training as you can off of 30 hours of big volume training. But I think there's a real reason why pro cyclists, the best cyclists, are doing 25, 30 hours a week throughout the year. And yeah, they're probably doing, on top of that, they're doing 25 hours on the bike, but maybe 5 hours in the gym as well. So it's just understanding for an amateur athlete how much time they can spend in the gym and if that will detract from their bike time and their bike fitness.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about, it's all about mitochondrial density, and you can get there basically 2 ways. You can get there slow and low, or you can get there with interval training where you're getting up and staying out of the gray area and getting up into zone 4 and zone 5 and, going up and down. Hong Kong's great because you have interval training out your door. You go left, you have a hill and you're up and down, or you go right and you have a hill and up and down. It's sort of built in. But if you have that interval session, once or twice a week, and you have that zone 2 session a couple times a week, that kind of takes care of the mitochondrial density from both sides. So I would be somebody that would argue for, and maybe I'm just getting somebody for 30 minutes doing a full body session. If I could just get him to be consistent with that 3 times a week, I would only be asking for an hour and a half. Honestly, with dynamic warm up and cool down, maybe 2 hours total out of that, say, given 8 or 9 that they have. And it's well worth it, especially if you have somebody that is mixing in impact sports like running. From an injury prevention standpoint, it's just critical.
One thing I do enjoy about lifting is I just like the mental. I like training and doing something different that doesn't involve sitting on a bike. Because especially in winter, when you're like, so in the UK at the minute, today it's like -1 or -2. Yesterday I went out on my bike for 5 hours and it was about 1 degree all day, and I'm not going to say it was the most fun. And then and then the times when and then the other times I'm on a turbo trainer, and that's not always the most fun. And whilst I still love riding, sometimes it's nice just to have the mental break of doing something that's completely different, and going to a gym and lifting some weights. It's good. I think it's good for the soul to do something a bit different and mix the kind of the stimulus up a bit.
That's so true. And there's something sort of like primal about like picking up something heavy and executing like a deadlift or a press or a pull up with good form. It make I think you and I talked about that one time. It feels really good.
Yeah, it's satisfying.
Yeah.
You do feel good for it. Like your whole body feels kind of good afterwards. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
it
agree.
makes you feel strong. I want to talk about possible over specializing, and I have to be careful with this one. Um, just because my goal isn't to make somebody upset, but I just want people to think about just more holistically about their fitness, their wellness, I should say. And it's not just endurance athletes. You see it in CrossFit, obstacle course racing, even dragon boat racing here in Hong Kong, which is sort of a rowing sport. It's really, really big here, as is trail running. And I think folks sort of fall in love with fill in the blank sport, endurance, strength, CrossFit, whatever it is. And the competition around the sport. And then so they sort of focus on, okay, I've got to get better at this sport. I've got to get faster at this time. I've got to put out this power. I've got to beat whoever this person is over here in my age group, whatever. And they lose the focus on why they started maybe training in the first place, which most of the time is to be healthier, or maybe even to have a bit of fun. And they start worrying too much about those things that I just mentioned instead of the overall strategy of making themselves healthier and happier. I think I'm seeing this happening more and more where the benefit of competition is almost overriding the benefit of overall wellness and having the connection across the different wellness dimensions like social and emotional and spiritual and environmental. It's just all physical all the time, all competition.
Yeah, no, I do really agree with that. In that, when you when you start kind of calling yourself a cyclist, like in inverted commas, as I do, like i.e., as you spend more time cycling, and that's what you really focus on, and that's what you compete in, you do lose sight of your overall health and well-being. And a lot of people, I don't know much about the research behind it because I've never really bothered reading into it, to be honest. But a lot of people say that cyclists, because it's a non-weight bearing sport, you should do some impact type of sport or some weight bearing sport, such as running or lifting, because it's for your bone density.
Yes,
Because
bone
just
density.
sitting on a bike and pedaling and not bearing any weight means your bone density goes down a lot. So
That's exactly
there
right.
is that side to being a full body, to doing mixed sorts of um, activity. And I think you really hit the nail on the head in that when you start to specialize and you start getting really focused on cycling or running or CrossFit or something, you do lose sight on the fact that you are probably just an amateur who nobody is going to remember in 10 years' time, let's face it, with regards to you being a cyclist, and that you will have started cycling because you loved the fresh air, you loved how the endorphins made you feel,
Mm-hmm.
you
Yeah.
wanted to make sure you wanted to make sure you were looking after yourself on a basic level, and then you just think, oh well, I can't go for a. And a lot of people like that take cycling as serious as me will do this. They'll, if their family or their girlfriend or someone says, let's go on a walk up a mountain for 5 hours, they'll be like, no way, because that will ruin my legs for the bike. Like, and
Right.
if somebody said that to me now, let's go on like a 5 hour hike up a huge mountain, I would be like, well, I can't because I've trained tomorrow and I'm
Right.
going to feel awful. And you do lose sight of what's fun, like what is, like, out outdoor pursuits as fun. And I do sometimes envy people like, say, my sister or some of my friends who they like training and they like outdoor pursuits, but they don't take any of them seriously, and they exercise to look after themselves and to have fun. And they might, casually go for a half-hour run a couple of times a week. They might go for a swim if they fancy it. They might go and do some CrossFit because they got given a class for Christmas or something, and they're doing all sorts of stuff, and it's really interesting and varied, and they're really enjoying it. Whereas when you become when you start specializing and you're doing like, maybe 15 hours a week of cycling, sometimes you feel, and I get like this sometimes, you feel this real duty to train.
Mm-hmm.
And you get training guilt. Like, so if you miss a session because you just aren't feeling sitting on a bike that day, you feel bad about it afterwards. And that sort of specialism can create that sort of slightly unhealthy atmosphere of feeling pressure from yourself to train.
Yeah, I appreciate your honesty, Jim. I think you're exactly right. And I think you're inside the head of a lot of athletes. And again, like I said, it's not just endurance athletes. You're talking from a cycling endurance athlete perspective. But I think, CrossFit, the CrossFit Games, I don't know if you ever watched the CrossFit Games. So they're pretty exciting. So one of the events is walking on your hands. It's a gymnastic skill and it's impressive. But unless you're going to the CrossFit Games, do you need to spend a certain number of hours per week walking on your hands? Well, me as your coach, I would say no. Let's work on different exercises that are maybe just a little bit more functional. And so I think what you're trying to say, Jim, and what I'm saying, I really enjoyed multi-sport. I liked triathlon, although I wasn't great at it. I really enjoyed it. And I trained too much to the triathlon side. Strength training has always been a part of my program, but I would get myself into a spot where I was getting injured or making my strength training workouts suffer because I was going too hard on the endurance side of things. And so I think what we're trying to say, something interesting happened to me this last year. I think that's worth sharing. So I got a knee injury, and it ended up being one of the best things that ever happened to me because I discovered mobility. I talked about mobility a lot this year, as you mentioned earlier. And I didn't do one freaking race. Not one race. I didn't do one triathlon. I didn't do one duathlon. I didn't do any cycling races. Not one. And I didn't die. I survived by not doing a race. And I feel just a little bit more balanced about not having to have that thing on the calendar to motivate me to train. I've never really had to have that extra motivation to train, but from an aerobic perspective, I always liked having that thing up there to make me sort of push it a little harder on the run or maybe get that extra swim or bike or whatever in per week. But I think what we're trying to say is maybe it's okay if you don't have that extra race on the calendar. Maybe that's the first thing for you, but it shouldn't make you too tired to play with your kids. It shouldn't turn your hormones into this crazy spiral where and we'll talk about heart rate variability in a little bit, where your heart rate variability score is low. It shouldn't negatively affect your relationships with your family. It shouldn't make us, so tired that we can't do the other things in life that we should be doing, like you alluded to earlier. It shouldn't just make us really good in the gym or just really good in the pool or just really good on the bike or just running in a straight line or just walking on our hands. Fitness should be helping us become more holistically balanced and strong everywhere.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And that's the thing. The better you get at something within the amateur sphere, the better you want to be at it. And so if people like the achieving amateurs, like perhaps you could call myself, you start taking it more and more seriously, and you start putting more and more pressure on yourself, and you lose sight of the fact that you're actually, in my case, I'm actually a writer. I'm not an athlete. My job, the way I make a living, is as an athlete, and also, I do other things as well, which I have other hobbies. I like kind of live music and gigs and stuff, and sometimes you can lose sight of doing other things because you're like training, and you can get in this head state where you just become so focused on training that you lose sight of other things that are important in life. And that's something that's a challenge that I have faced a lot with regards to a lot of different areas, which I think you're going to go into, like one of which is particularly like, say, my relationship with food,
Hmm.
and other things as well, to a lesser extent, perhaps.
Yeah, I think that's a good transition. So, as I alluded to earlier, I think you're just such a dang good writer. I wanted to read an excerpt from your blog that talks a little bit about your disordered eating. I think it's a really honest piece that I think will resonate with my audience a lot, because I'm sure there's lots of other folks that struggle with this. So you wrote this awesome article. It's called "Overcooking and Undereating: A Cautionary Tale." And as always, Jim has, sort of his tongue in cheek in a lot of different pieces that he writes. He writes with honesty and humor, and I really enjoy it. So I quote from Jim. He says, "I always had viewed images of the pros at their peak leanness with a mixture of disgust and awe." I love that. Images of the stick-like figures of like Froome and Poels flying through the high peaks always struck a slightly romantic nerve. The classic image of the solitary troubled climber. Whilst I knew their physique to be one that should be neither idolized or aspired to, it sort of intrigued and appealed to me. The gaunt, slightly shocking look on their faces, the pointy cheekbones, collarbones, and elbows did fascinate somewhat. Any athlete, be they pro or amateur, who tries to manipulate their weight and body composition to be optimal, that is minimal in this case, in time for a certain event, knows that trying to lose a few kg for their A races and then maintaining that feathery mass is far from fun. I know this and yet enjoy the mild torture of attempting to be at my lightest all the time. Just as more is more in training, less is less with weight. This has caused me problems and discomforts of the whole of my recent adult life. A lack of weight and general resilience has led to minor ailments of all sorts, ranging from common bouts of anemia and Raynaud's syndrome to digestive issues and constant sense of being cold, getting knocked out of line by small children, etc., etc. As I said, there is some humor in this, which I think is great. But that was just the way it was. I accepted it was an inevitable consequence. There's a slightly sick joke amongst the cycling community that when your mom or nan or aunt, insert any other elderly female relative here, tells you that you look unwell and you need to be fed and you're on then that means you're on form. So if they're saying you need to be fed, you're on form. I love that. So you're down at race weight and ready to fight. Another sign of this, in my experience, has been your heart rate monitor slipping down your chest. Without a bit of extra temper to grip onto, the bloody thing just doesn't sit still. I craved both of these frustrating symptoms of being lean, too lean. So, Jim, as I said, I think you're a great writer. I think it's super honest. It's funny. And I think it's not polarizing. I think a lot of people can that really resonates with them, with a struggle of trying to have power and have strength, but still be light enough to be fast, and even sort of romanticizing the looks of professional bicyclists can be almost, dangerous, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's not a look to aspire to by any means, and I I don't really like, want to look like Chris Froome or anything. I never did, but I did always find it quite fascinating. These super lean, like these just like machines on a bike, and but and yeah, I just slowly started from for not that long after I started riding and realized I was naturally good at climbing, developing this slightly strange relationship with food, in that, yeah, it's in on a bike, it's all about maximizing your power to weight. So the power you can put through the pedals to the weight that you're carrying, because the more power and the less weight means you go up a hill faster, basically. And it's a real example of the way that you can, as a high performing amateur, you lose sight of things that are normal in life and which are actually healthy. So
Mm-hmm.
I still struggle with this issue, which I believe is it's kind of called orthorexia, I guess, or there's also a term called like RED-S, which is relative energy deficiency in sport, whereby you're never quite you're not really fueling enough to reap the full rewards of your training, because you're so focused on being lean or lightweight. You're not really actually fueling your body enough to do its best in your actual sport. And yeah, a it's a difficult thing, and it's something that, to be honest, I still struggle with, and I have been having problems with it recently, and so it becomes difficult as well, because as when I started lifting again, I was very keen to gain some weight
Mm-hmm.
and to gain some muscle mass, and I still do. But then there's this fight whereby you're like, well, I'm a climber, therefore I don't want to be too heavy. Uh, uh, so I don't want to gain too much weight, but then I need to fuel the lifting, I need to fuel the bike training, and also I want to gain a little bit of muscle mass so that I'm more powerful on the bike, but not so much that I get too heavy so I go slowly up a mountain. And it just becomes this massive like maelstrom in your head of just conflicting emotions. And then also I love eating, and like I love burgers, I love pizzas, and I don't eat
Mm-hmm.
them often enough because they make me happy. But I sort of don't really. I try not to let myself eat them too much. Whereas I wish I did eat them more because they're nice.
Yeah, I can appreciate how frustrating it is to be trying to build in that power, um, and build in that extra little bit of mass that you know would be healthy for you, but always in the back of your mind worrying about the other side of the coin of having to haul that, up the mountain, that just extra little bit. And so I'm sure that that's super frustrating. I think I'm almost blessed in the fact that I'm not good enough on the bike to worry about it. I'm like, yeah, it's still, I'm always going to be slow. I may as well look good on the beach. Right. So I'll just put those pants
Yeah,
on. In fact, I'm actually kind of doing the opposite thing. I've been shortening my rides with my buddies here, down to about an hour, which I know probably sounds almost like nothing to you, but it's an intense hour. And, if I'm just trying to, build up an aerobic capacity and do some good cardiovascular exercise for my heart and burn some calories, an hour is really pretty good. And I had sort of fallen into this pattern just because the groups that I was riding with would an hour and a half would actually be sort of the shorter ride. And I'm like, oh man, and I started noticing myself in the gym. I was okay. I was still strong, but I started noticing some body composition stuff happening. I wasn't retaining as much muscle. And so it's just a little tweak to help balance myself out. So for me, it's almost of an opposite thing where I'm not necessarily looking at performance on the bike, but I was starting to lose some mass, that I had worked. I mean, you can appreciate this. It's dang hard work for an ectomorphic body type, which you and I both are, to put on muscle. It's really hard not only to put it on, but to maintain it from a caloric perspective and from a work perspective. So it's probably one of the trickiest things in sport is finding that balance between fueling your body and getting your workouts in that are going to your support workouts or your accessory workouts, if you will, to push forward whatever it is that you're trying to boost performance in. It's tricky and it's
yeah.
frustrating.
There's that old saying that performance particularly, well, it probably, I think it applies in weightlifting and things, but I know certainly in endurance sports, it's often said that your performance is kind of 20% training and 80% food.
Mm-hmm.
That's how much of it, that's how important your diet is. But so then you've got, even if you do have this understanding of your diet, it's, you keep on getting these different theories going around. And I was toying with this the other day. So 3 or 4 years ago, particularly, say, well, I think for all types of athletes, it was always, have some protein before bed to fuel like overnight muscle regeneration. And now I know it's quite a different sort of line of thinking, and you can probably bring the two together. So a few years ago, everybody was talking about protein before bed. Now everybody's talking about fasting for 16 hours. And it's like, so what do
Yeah.
you, what, for somebody who is knowledgeable but not an expert like me, like what are you supposed to be doing? What's the best? There's just
Yeah.
so much. So there's almost too much knowledge, and sometimes I think that with diet and nutrition, at least, you need to. And this is the approach I try and follow: is don't like follow any particular rules, or like fasting and don't eat this at that time and don't eat that at this time. Just listen to your body, eat a sensible diet that is natural. I'm a meat eater, but I try and eat predominantly plants. And yeah, the main thing is listen to your body and fuel it when it needs it. And I'm trying to do that more now, because for the last 7, 8 years of my life, I haven't listened to my body, and I haven't always fueled it when it needs it.
Yeah, I think that's really a smart thing to do for yourself, and that's good advice. And from a fasting perspective, if you're in a portion of your training where you're trying to add mass, it's okay to go ahead, and if you really like intermittent fasting, I would actually remove it for that period, and then do a prolonged fast. So maybe if you overnight fast every night, which I do and I like, but let's say I really want to put some mass on, I would avoid that. I would go ahead and eat at a 9 or 10 hour interval in the morning when I normally wouldn't, but then put in a prolonged fast maybe once a month, because you get the real big benefits of fasting are autophagy of cells, right? So like whenever you fast for over 24 hours, it's been shown that you actually have this big spring cleaning of your cells. You're getting rid of all the cells that your body sees as, oh, you're not doing us any good. Like even cancer cells. It's pretty exciting. If you're an old guy like me and you're over 40, you already have some cancer cells building up. So if you do one of these nice 24 to 40 hour fasts, you have this nice big spring cleaning in the body, and you get all the really big time, like extending life type of benefits of fasting, and not having to worry about sort of this calorie juggling that you might have to on a normal basis. So I think, like you said, of listening to your body, and if you're training those big 5-hour sessions and your body's saying, gosh, I really need fat, I really need carbs. Yeah, it's about the quality of the nutrients. So it's good to hear you eating a lot of plant-based stuff, because you're going to get a lot of quality nutrients there. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, you should see my fridge. It's basically just like green.
Nice.
It's green, kind of green and red things.
Yeah, I could come
Mostly.
stay. It sounds like I could eat there.
Well, I'm not sure, Paul. You're a big guy. Like, it's only a small fridge, so maybe not enough.
I'll finish it
Not
up in a
enough
day or
space
two.
for
Yeah.
it.
Well, I want to talk. This actually is a good lead into, to understanding what our body needs. You did some good evaluation of your heart rate variability. I've talked about it a number of times on my podcast, and as you're sort of reconfiguring things now with your program, we were talking off the air earlier about maybe you're going to start evaluating it again. So I think it might be something for you to add in as just another thing to look at while you're trying to balance out your training. But as we've talked about on the show a whole bunch of times, with heart rate variability, you're actually understanding how stressed your body is. Are you in a sympathetic state or a parasympathetic state? And on any given day, because it's a daily activity, you're going to understand, what your training program is going to look like, and what you might need to do from a sleep, a nutrition, and even a parasympathetic standpoint, like doing things like meditation and walking and that sort of thing. So tell my audience a little bit about, some of the stuff you've done with heart rate variability. I know you had a really cool toy that you're using for a while.
Yeah, so I've got this. They're a new American brand who have recently sort of started selling worldwide, called Whoop, and it's just a wrist strap, which those of you who are watching this can kind of see here.
Looks cool.
And it measures your sleep, your heart rate variability, and also a heart rate based sort of stress score. So it will give you a result at the end of every day of what your stress, or Whoop's term for it is strain, but based on your workouts, but also just your day-to-day sort of activity. So if you go shopping, then that's going to, shopping for groceries, that's going to up your strain. So yeah, I used it for quite a long time. A long time, probably about 9 months, and
That's good.
it was giving me HRV scores and sleep quality scores and things, because it's got a very accurate sleep tracker as well. And I understand all the theory behind, when your heart rate variability is indicating it's time for you that you're fresh and you're ready to go. That's when you want to do your most intense workouts. Whereas if it's saying your HRV is low, then you're tired and you need to sort of take it easy. I think I've got that the right way around.
You do?
Yeah. And but the problem is when you're trying to unless you're a full-time athlete and you have a very flexible lifestyle, it's the fact that you might have on your training plan one day do 5 hours on a bike, and then the other days are maybe 1 hours of bike or strength training. And on those days where you have lower duration workouts, you plan around all your work and you plan your phone calls and you plan to send off this report or whatever, this blog or draft. And then it's about having the flexibility to follow your HRV monitor. But I do think it's a valuable tool, and I think the way that and I do, since when I have issues with this kind of eating problem that I have, when it gets out of control and I lose a bit of weight suddenly, I lose a lot of my ability to train. In that I can still train, but the workouts aren't good. And you were saying, Paul, about how keeping an eye on your HRV, my HRV, would give me a good insight, obviously, into when I'm fresh and strong, but also into my diet as well, because I know that diet quality or diet volume perhaps has an impact on your HRV. So I've got this gadget and it's just been sitting, not doing anything. And I kind of did stop using it a bit, but I'm thinking about going back to it. I think one of the issues I had with it was the way that it could, if you start reading into HRV too much and it's telling you your HRV is poor, don't train anything too hard today, but you sort of have to train something hard.
Yes.
That's your schedule. Then you get in the back of your mind, oh, my HRV is poor, therefore I'm not going to be able to hit the numbers on this workout, or I'm not going to be able to hit this interval. And then such a big part of your training is your mental approach to it, that if you've got something which has told you first thing that morning you're going to be rubbish at your training session, then it doesn't put you in a good place. And I think that is the reason why I stopped using it. Actually, that was the main reason.
That's a good point. So yeah, let's talk about that. So heart rate variability, you're basically, this is not very scientific, so forgive me, but in layman's terms, because I'm a layman, if your heart rate variability is really consistent and really sort of short together, the space between your heart beats is really consistent and really short, you're going to be in a sympathetic state. Your HRV score is going to be low. And opposite, if you have sort of space between your heartbeats, the time between your heartbeats is longer and sort of inconsistent. That means your body is more parasympathetic, more at rest. And so what I was picturing for you, Jim, and that's a good point. First of all, it's the mental piece of, okay, my heart rate variability score is in the tank today. I'm going to have a crap workout because my heart rate variability score sucks, even though I may feel okay. That's a good point. I think that's the same reason why some of my buddies just don't even look at their heart rate while they're riding, because they don't they don't want to know. Either they're going to be scared or they don't want to know the number, and then they perform however they're going to perform without it, which is an interesting thing. But for you, I wonder if maybe you don't even look at the thing. Maybe you take your HRV, and so you've got column 1 is your HRV score daily. Look at it every week as average. Then your sleep for a whole week average daily, but over an average. TSS score we talked about. So training peaks, TSS score. It's basically just gathering up all your heart rate data from your workouts and giving you a score. If it's a really high heart rate over a longer period of time, it's going to be a higher score. And then I think your 4th column, Jim, is nutrition. Just total calories. You eat pretty well, so we won't worry about the quality of those. And then what are your workouts like overlaid across those 4 columns? Good workout, good workout, good workout, and all those other scores sort of are consistent with that. Maybe your calories are above X. And so it's more of a trend thing for you than I think it will be like a daily workout evaluation, like whether or not you're ready to push it. It might be an interesting way to see if you're at a certain calorie level, if your workouts and your HRV and your TSS sort of follow suit with that. It would just be interesting. If I was coaching you, I would be interested to look at that for like 2 months.
Yeah, doing it that way, that like you said, almost as a retrospective, looking back on a week, just to see what was going on, but not using it to influence my decisions on my training influence what I did on the bike or what I ate. It would be interesting just to see, so that day, Jim, you did a high intensity workout and you probably didn't eat quite enough, and your HRV the next day was in the tank. Then that's giving good data and would give me a better understanding of what I need to be giving my body, and probably be a good stimulus for me to sort my kind of issues around eating out as well. So I've got this gadget, and it's something that I've been thinking about, getting back into using again. So I may well steal.
I'm gonna hold you to it. We're gonna check back in with you. We're gonna see how it goes.
There's no charge, is there?
No charge. No, you're my buddy. I want to see you, do well. I want to see you succeed. You're gonna write the most epic stuff when you're feeling your best. So I want to read more of your stuff. It's got to be good.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, thanks, man.
We got to talk about Strava. And I know I've got to let you go. I've had you on for a long time, but before we go, you just wrote a really good article just a couple days ago, actually, about Strava. And for those of you that are into endurance, or even crazy people like me that even put their strength workouts up there. Now, my strength workouts, I include sometimes a video with some helpful tips. So it's not just an annoying thing for somebody that's just there for endurance. You might learn a thing or two if you check out my strength workouts on Strava, but I know it drives some of my endurance buddies crazy. But so you wrote this article. Do you pronounce it Stravanoia? Is that the correct pronunciation for it? Like paranoia, but Stravanoia. Okay. So you point to how it can be pretty destructive to us athletes on why we push to perform at a certain level at any given session and where we maybe don't want to or need to or should. And we're not talking about, perseverance here. This is just trying to, put up this impressive number for your Strava portfolio. So, and I loved how you say, if you have a bad workout, you really fill in, and you said the all important title and notes sections to sort of describe, why it was sort of a crap session. So, but you had some good points. Like, are we worrying too much about how we appear on this social media tool instead of just, having fun and getting a good workout in and worrying about our health?
Yeah, I think Strava is all in. It's a great thing. It's for some people, it's their way of tracking their fitness. It's a good way of like building routes. It's a good way of you can kind of meet people through Strava. But there is, I think, for some, you can start taking it a bit too sort of, you can start worrying about it. So I know that some people, and I got this phrase Stravanoia from a podcast I was listening to about pro cyclists, and that's where they coined the term. But there's this paranoia around Strava that you don't want to look, when you're taking yourself kind of seriously, you don't want to look weak on Strava. So if, say, your session for the day is a recovery ride and your recovery bike ride should be at 150 watts or say 20 kilometers an hour if you don't use power, then you actually think, oh, rather than doing it 150 watts, I might just do it at 180 watts, like that bit harder. So that if anybody looks on my Strava, I kind of look a bit more, I can call it a recovery ride, but I'm actually doing it that bit harder, and it makes me look that bit fitter. And it's by doing it that little bit harder, you're not getting the benefits out of that session.
Like, oh, Jim, that's a recovery ride for you. Wow, you're strong.
Yeah. Oh, that's a recovery ride, but you're still doing it this fast, kind of thing. It's like, and I think quite a lot of people kind of do that, and I think that Strava can become a little bit destructive in the way, sort of like Instagram or Facebook. It can be used as a tool for painting yourself in the best possible light possible, and not really being honest with yourself, or not being honest with yourself about how you feel, and it can just lead you to do weird things in workouts. And I also think as well that the way when you're looking on a Strava file, so you give it a title and you can put some little notes in afterwards. It gives a good insight into an athlete's mindset as well. So
yes.
if an athlete's on form, and they have a great ride, they'll probably put in a few little notes saying, legs felt great, did my hit a PR up this. And sometimes when they're feeling on bad form, they either, if it's me, if I'm on awful form, I just don't even want to look at the file and I kind of ignore it. Or you just come out with this ton of excuses to kind of justify why you had a bad session. And Strava's a great tool. I just think you can take it too seriously and it can lead to this slightly strange behavior, which all comes back perhaps to this way that serious amateurs lose sight of why they're doing the sport in the first place.
Yes, it's so true. You know what I think the power move is right now? And I don't even know if my buddy knows that he's doing a power move, but like my friend back in Kansas is super, super strong. Just an amazing endurance athlete. Dirty Kanza in Kansas?
Yeah.
The epic gravel riding race. So he did I can't remember if he did the 100 or 200 last year. It doesn't matter. They're both amazing, epic, whatever. And so you know what his Strava session said for the 13-hour, however many hundreds of miles? It just said morning ride, no description. It just said, I think that's the power move. You just let the session speak for itself, just morning ride, kabow.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's a sign of real sort of confidence. Some of the best athletes I know they upload a ride to Strava and they look at it, but they don't bother like writing anything about it. So they might have just won Dirty Canada and they're just like, it's just a morning ride.
Yeah, just a morning ride, no big deal. Well, the other thing that's getting out of control, in my opinion, on Strava is these badges. Now, I actually do like the climbing thing every month. I think that's kind of fun, and you see how your buddies are doing with that. But there's this one, and I talked to you about this earlier. It's called the New Balance Run You Challenge or badge or whatever. And so it says, last January, the average active Strava runner ran 45 miles. But in 2019, New Balance challenges you to aim higher, go 2.019 times farther this year, and cover 91 miles by the end of the month. And so it's like this thing of like just more is better. Like if you go further, it's better. And if you go higher, it's better. And so some new runner is going to go out. They're going to okay, I've got to get this 91 mile challenge going. That's 23 miles a week. some new runner is going to start getting shin splints 5 miles into this and get hurt. They're not doing mobility work or strength training. They won't even finish the challenge. They think there's something wrong with them. It's their fault. It's this ridiculous challenge. Like, further is not always better. Running isn't the only activity people should be doing for health. Like, if you're doing 23 miles a week, that could take a crazy amount of time if somebody doesn't have that much time to exercise. So I think Strava kind of encourages more time and speed and distance, all sort of in the name of health and performance. And it sort of sets a false guideline for health. And it's kind of dangerous for new athletes that maybe don't know better.
Yeah, there's a very similar example, which is Fest 500, which Rafa kind of sponsor, Rafa the clothes brand, which is basically you have to ride 500 kilometers between Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve, and there's a great intention behind it, which is to kind of keep you healthy and active over the festive period, and to keep you moving. But a lot of people turn themselves inside out, particularly in like northern Europe.
Oh God, it's cold as heck.
It's really bad weather and it's really cold. People turn themselves inside out to hit this 500k in 8 days, and then they might do it, but then I know 2 people who are strong riders who completed it and then spent about 10 days hardly riding because they were ill or like kind of overtrained, and it's like, well, what was the point?
Yeah.
Really?
That's that whole balance thing. It's getting yourself out of balance to go after a badge for what? Yeah, it's silly.
Yeah, that means absolutely nothing. Yeah.
All right, I bet you've got some stories. I got to let you go. A couple quick questions though. What's your funniest story from just a bike ride or a race? Do you have anything that comes to mind in all your years of riding?
Oh, wow! This one's caught me off guard. I'm not sure. I've seen. Well, it's not funny. It's sort of a bit grim. Like in a few endurance rides, I've seen plenty of times people either on the Marmotte that we were talking about, which is a huge ride through the French Alps. I've seen people being sick by the side of the road, people having to, take a number 2 by the side of the road. So I wouldn't say that's funny, but
it's funny.
It brings to light the level of challenge. In terms of pure funny stuff, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Sorry. If I think of something, I'll let you know, and you can put it in the show notes.
If you ever see me ride, that'll be your story right there. It's just this terrible on the flats and the climbs.
Like massive muscly man doing on a bike.
Why is he trying to keep up with all of us? He keeps trying to come every week. What is he doing? All right, best bike route you've ever ridden. I know you've done some epic stuff. What is your favorite?
Oh, wow. Well, in terms of, I wouldn't be able to specify a particular route, but in terms of area to ride a bike, quite a lot of people who know me well will know that I absolutely love the Pyrenees, which is the mountain range kind of between France and Spain. So it's the southwest of France, and it's not as well known as the Alps. The mountains aren't as high, but it's just absolutely beautiful. It's like kind of untouched by tourism, so there's less like big ski stations and tourist towns. It's this just the greens in the woods and the meadows are like the greenest greens you've ever seen. There's donkeys and sheep like walking all over the road. It's like the most magical place I've ever been, and I race there every year, and if I could, I would go and live there. It's like, the French Pyrenees is like no other, and I urge people to go there, but I also don't want people to go there because the beauty of it is that it's natural and it's not being tainted by over tourism.
Right.
But yeah, it's amazing.
That sounds awesome. Last question, Jim. So when you think about the different dimensions of wellness, physical, it sounds like you're pretty much on autopilot. But when you think about your physical, your intellectual, occupational, emotional, social, environmental, spiritual, all the dimensions of wellness, how do you find your wellness balance? And it's sort of almost silly to ask because it changes for everybody every day, but how do you best juggle all these different dimensions of wellness? What are some of the things that you do to help you sort of make it through and stay as balanced as you can?
It's a difficult question. I try,
Ride your bike.
although I,
I know that one.
yeah, although I do take it all very seriously and I do let it impact the way I behave, I try not to take, I try to remember that not to take it too serious as well. And I try to just try as much as possible to remain grounded. But in terms of sort of specific tactics, something I've started doing slightly more recently, and since I've been getting a bit kind of worked up about things with dietary issues and health issues, is I've started meditating a bit. So not I only have been doing it kind of informally using an app called Headspace,
Oh, that's a
but
great
I
app.
do.
Yeah.
So I haven't even subscribed yet. I'm still on the free trial, but I think I will subscribe. I used to use an app called Calm, but I've started to find it a bit annoying. So I'm going to try Headspace. But I do find that a bit of meditation. I normally do it when I'm lying in bed before bed. Just I don't know, and I do want to start trying to do it in the morning as well. I do find it kind of clears my brain out a bit, and it sort of makes me feel kind of calmer, and perhaps makes me feel a bit more lucid and makes things clearer in my mind,
Yeah.
particularly when I'm like got a lot of things going on in my mind which are perhaps causing me issues. So yeah, perhaps that would be it. Bit of meditation.
Yeah, I can't remember the name of the founder of that app, but he's the one who speaks. Oh gosh, it's on the tip of my
Yeah,
tongue. Just his voice, he's just got like a soothing voice. Like his voice alone, like just sort of gets you in the right spot. Um,
yeah,
and I don't want to give it
yeah,
away if you haven't heard this one yet, but one of the best things I heard him say was to think of meditation like traffic. Like you've got this road out in front of you, and cars are emotions. And so a truck goes by, and that's sadness. And another car goes by, and that's anger. And maybe another one goes by, and that's happiness. And so you can choose to get on the ride for any one of those and sort of take the roller coaster on of down the anger trail or the frustration trail or whatever. Or you can just say, oh, that's interesting. That's an interesting car, but I'm just going to let that pass by. And so people that get really good at meditation, like that sort of transcendental stuff, sort of are really good at just sort of recognizing that something's there and then just sort of letting it flow through. I am not very good at it yet, but when I've practiced it, I've seen myself, to your point, in certain situations where I'm like, okay, I'm recognizing this is the spot where I would normally get in that car, and I'm just going to try to let that go by. And it can be pretty powerful, especially if it's a car that's moving pretty fast.
yeah. It's about recognizing when you're recognizing if you've got a certain emotion kind of building, and just yeah, like you say, as the app teaches you, just letting those emotions kind of come by you and like acknowledging that, but sort of not getting on that truck.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's something I could do with getting good at.
All right, Jim. Well, thank you so much. I kept you for a long time. I really appreciate you coming on my show. It was really fun to talk to you. We got to have you come back sometime. We're going to ask you some questions about putting together that little spreadsheet with your heart variability and some MC nutrition. I hope that helps balance things out for you. Really appreciate your honesty and sharing your story. And I really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.
It was my pleasure, buddy.